Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Welcome back to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thanks for coming along on this journey of this show that we designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. Hey, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show with Craig Brown, an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, how are you today?
I'm great, Tom. It's good to hear your voice. Topic today will be a little different. It's not engineering. It's more about workforce. So this will be maybe some insights for others.
Well, and I like it because I think we always try to bring people sort of different interviews that are both interesting and full of ideas that are going to help them enhance and grow their careers. So that's what we're going to do today. And today we have Lory Antonucci. Now, she is with Manpower, and she is the Director of Workforce, Innovations, and Solutions. Hey, Lory, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
Thank you, Thom and Craig. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you. So what is your background? Tell us a little bit about how your career started, what you did, and what led you to where you are now, and then maybe a little bit about what you do.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it won't sound like an obvious connection at the beginning. I actually started out as an undergrad at Stanford thinking I would go into medicine or health administration because I loved the connection between people and health and just thought that was very important. But I ended up actually studying more at the organizational systems level, almost like a business school biology bridge. And so that took me into several areas on the people side of business over the years. So I've done everything from performance improvement projects to running regional training and learning organizations to moving into consulting with major consulting firms, focusing on change and organizational effectiveness and really just taking that people side of business approach to making the organization, the business better. So last 10 years or so, it's been a hardcore focus on workforce planning, which is what I do now at Manpower.
So what you're saying is we almost had to refer to you as Dr. Lory as far as the medical doctor.
Well, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you can, I'm partway through my second master's. The doctor will never happen, but I hope we'll talk about continuous learning, and I'm probably a decent example of that.
That's someday in the future, we're going to have a session on doctors and brilliance and innovation, but not today. Today, let's talk about, it's interesting you brought up biology. You got me thinking about how often mechanical systems or even control systems, we're all about precision and being, measuring really minute things and making controls. And, biological systems are quite the opposite, right? They do things you don't expect. Now, the chemistry is eventually understood, but what I'm getting at with biology is I wonder if the human systems and the way they interact with technology are more biologic than they are precise. That should be podcast number 2. I actually, my last 10 years have been a strong focus in the area of what's called biomimicry. So it's really understanding how we can look at nature and figure out, since it sort of got it right 4 billion years ago and has been working hard to keep going ever since. But there's a lot of, different ways of looking at the structures in nature and its processes and kind of its rules of the road and applying those into a lot of human situations. So the connections are very much there. I think many of us see them quite often. So is that part of what's happening with digital transformation? Is we shouldn't call people organisms, but for a moment, let's do that. Where some of the organisms adapt and others don't.
Absolutely.
Are there analogies there? So teach us, if we're one of those folks not adapting, and therefore we might go extinct. What should we do to be better at adapting to these digital changes?
Yeah, I think you hit on the word that's probably the first, guiding point, and that is just to recognize that, change and being able to change is actually the best evidence of health, in the sense that you can still learn how to adapt, you can figure out how to better use your time and resources. You don't waste a whole lot. If anything, you figure out how to do something with it, maintain the value of it, even if you have to change it. So I think, the whole concept of adapting and using change almost as the best form of self-care and health is a great model for people when they think of their work and what it means to keep learning and be adaptable and keep reskilling themselves.
So if they're not changing, can they self-manage that? Do they know that they're now part of the problem, part of the cancer, and not part of the solution? Or is that something that a peer or a report? A lot of times these are management that are stuck.
No,
or is it senior leadership? I mean,
yeah. Oh no, you're painting. Okay. Yeah, you're using a wonderfully colorful palette to paint the picture here. But I guess I'll focus in. You mentioned something about, do people realize that they're stuck? Mm-hmm. And, there's so much in front of all of us today that frankly, I sometimes wonder, are we stuck, or is it just kind of we're victims of overchoice? We're victims of so much information. And so, at some points it gets overwhelming and it's not always bad to sort of maybe stop a bit and not overreact, but that's very different from, I think, to your point, not knowing the difference between being stuck and looking for some of the right, ways that you can change. And so I think that that's where, peer feedback on the work, place is great. We've certainly changed a lot of the way managers are, guided to give feedback, be more of a coach, be more of a learner yourself with your team, with your people. Don't make it just a one-way kind of, review conversation. We've given people so many different options, I believe, in looking at their careers or where to go to get information and training, and all the way down, to micro learning and badges for every 2 weeks of some new skill they get, that there's a lot of options out there. So I think that, getting feedback from your peers, just being curious, frankly, is probably the number one thing after realizing that it's okay to change. It's actually pretty darn healthy.
Well, and I think curiosity, it's come up several times in our discussions. And I think the people, if you're feeling stale, then maybe you ask yourself, well, am I still curious? Or why am I not curious? Maybe right. It's fatigue, or maybe it's really time for something different.
Yeah. It's time for something different. So, I think there's a lot of ways that we can be a bit more self-analytical, to your point, but always asking for feedback from others. And then, frankly, just kind of taking a chance on some things. Last night in Chicago, a work colleague told me that the Field Museum sponsored this event that was over 100 sessions. They were each a short, presentation or interactive experience on a range of topics that would make the TED Talks, look like just a children's book. And to know that goes on in the community, that was just there for the taking. Now, I realize Chicago's a big city and they can maybe pull that off, but that's just one of 100 examples of where, you don't have to go that far to get a lot of exposure to some things that might pique your interest at a different point in life or at a different point in your career.
Yeah. So don't count on the workplace alone to be that place that you get inspiration. It could come from many other places.
Well, that's actually a big part of, Manpower Group's, probably core message is how much career development and career advancement is now in the hands of the individual versus the organization. Smart organizations who realize what they have to do to compete for talent definitely support it, offer it, work it in to the work.
So there's some
response.
interesting insight. If you're listening and you're, I'll go to cite a riot, and your leadership at your company is not encouraging this, go find another job.
Well, I was gonna add. This is
Go
Thom.
ahead, Thom.
I was gonna add that I've actually gone in and done training for a lot of companies in manufacturing, and I have found when I'm working, kind of setting it up, a lot of the HR people say we actually have a budget for people to be able to go outside of our training wheel or whatever you want to call it, and take something in the community that might inspire them. But then they also said that most employees don't come and take advantage of it. So I think,
That's right.
Craig, I think to what Craig said, I think there's a lot of companies already who are offering, hey, I've got $1,000 for you to go take a class on ceramics if that will help you get more creative. But
That's right.
But the worker's not doing it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think you both are identifying real proof of what we see happening, that there's a lot out there for all of us. I think it's getting harder and harder for many people to say, well, I don't see anything out there that can give me some new exposure. There's not a lot of training or development opportunities. We see it all the time. Manpower is a big intermediary. We sit between government and the workforce, employers, academia, and we kind of try to, we're like the grand orchestrators or the cocktail party host, but we are we see a lot of the different pieces out there, and it's an unfortunate truism that a lot gets left unused, and secondarily, it gets left unconnected. There's a lot of pieces out there that sometimes aren't aligning, which is why we spend a lot of time looking at future jobs and trying to give that kind of information back out, to industry and the workers and academia, so they can, maybe continue to connect a bit better.
Okay, so this is interesting. So give us the top 3 connections when we're talking about the digital enterprise. What are the top 3 connections people should be making that they aren't?
The top 3 are probably, and you're thinking in terms of how companies and work is changing and connecting
Either
to
way,
that.
either that
Okay.
or what individuals can do for themselves.
Yeah. No, I think in a way they do really kind of come together. So, I think first and foremost is that while digital and tech is ever present now, I think it's there because everybody wanted more connection and they wanted more mobility. So I don't think that's any surprise. I don't think that's anything new, but it's also frankly changed the nature of work and the jobs that many of us have, and then how we need to kind of get set up to be successful. So, if you aren't a great collaborator, if you don't like working across teams, that's probably something to work on. And if you do that well, that's really something to leverage, because that's one of the big digital era, kind of change themes, is just how much more work is done across organizations, across teams, and then outside the organization into their supply chain, into their community. So the whole concept of kind of connecting and collaborating, I don't care if it's technically based, business based, et cetera, that's like just one of the key things. You got to figure out how to show up in a multi kind of group, multi-team, multi-person setting, and bring your better self to that. I think that's the first thing. I think maybe 2 more might be this idea that we've got all this data, we all know about that. Digital has done nothing else if it hasn't made our work a bit more quantifiable. And that means both in terms of our work can be measured differently, for better or for worse. And we have to be able to use data, be more comfortable with it. I always encourage the people I'm mentoring or my team, I remind myself, go into most situations with at least a couple pieces of data, and just so you can anchor on what some of that measurable or more quantitative knowledge is. So I think that's the second big arena. And I guess the last one, besides cross-functional and sort of the quantitative, is that we're seeing such a real drive, and the numbers are staggering in terms of percents of employees who care about a mission orientation, or a, really making sure that the work they do or the company they work for has some connection to doing something good.
Is that Is that across all generations?
It's actually quite across generations.
Okay.
And so, yeah, there's some different studies out there where, anywhere from 60 to 75% across all age groups of employed people would actually be willing to take a pay cut, up to maybe 10% or so, but to go work in an organization that was just a bit more focused on some form of a positive mission. Doesn't mean it's always environmental, which many people assume, and of course is certainly valid, but really just that it's not just about making money. It's about bringing some value to the customer. It's about solving a problem, so that mission orientation, I think, is part of the digital era. And again, comes back to people wanting to connect, wanting to find some value in this kind of crazy world.
So talk to us for a second about those of the listeners who are in their mid-management or maybe senior management years. I found some of the insights from you folks at these conferences really interesting. Kind of wish I was still back at a large company so I could apply them. And I thought it would be good if you would just share a couple of those points. So what do you think the 40 to 60-year-old manager, middle manager, leader, what do they need to know about the workforce and how it's changing?
So I think the first thing they need to know is that, coaching is going to work better than directing, but don't forget to make sure good direction is known. So I think it's, I don't know that this is that earth-shattering, but in the sense of, working through kind of the vision for the project, the team, the organization, having a relatively clear picture of what that can be, but then using a lot more coaching versus directing. I think that's a real critical thing with the workforce that we have. And it's not just, quote, millennials, because by the way, they're kind of moving on and getting older. We've got, the next cohort coming.
So the people who have, no offense to you, the people that have director in their name, should they have coach in their title instead?
So this is a concept that I love that you bring up, which is job titles. I've been quoted before that said, jobs are dead, long live roles, because I think a lot of what is healthy for all of us, regardless of where we are in our career, is to also, really think hard about the different roles that we play. And so coach is a key role that any leader at any level, from a first line supervisor to the CEO, plays. That's a role.
I had a pet peeve late in my career with the term director, not because of the people that had the job, but because a lot of the people that work for them, well, I need direction before I can proceed. It's as if they gave up the ability to have critical thinking and to make good decisions, whatever the thing was they were talking about. And I was just amazed. I started back when software engineering wasn't known about, and 40 years later I retired. So I was in all kinds of situations where you never waited on direction. My goodness, that would be too late, right? Especially if you're in the software business. And the truth is, most of those folks that you worked for, they didn't know either. They didn't have the skills that I had when I was a 20 or 30 year old. So kind of interesting. I do think it connects to a couple thoughts that I'll bring up. If you want to pursue them, great. If not, I think at least they'll be planted in the mind of some of our listeners. But you mentioned about maybe there's a gap in some people's ability to do, apply critical thinking. And so the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, as many people know it, periodically releases very publicly the kinds of skills that employers are looking for, because they're hearing from a lot of their membership, right, of the skills and where we're having problems. And so creative problem solving and critical thinking are two of the most in-demand skills. Folks at LinkedIn, you could look at any number of different articles they've talked about that they also acknowledge that while the technology skills, of course, are really critical, you don't get a lot of power out of those if you can't solve problems and if you can't apply critical thinking. So again, whether you're on the business side or the tech side, those skills are really important. And so I think, again, at any age, to kind of refresh. And what does that mean? And that's where
I kind of love working and talking with engineers because they have a bit of that innate sort of structured thinking and analytical approaches to things that I think is very helpful. And I think blending it then with what we talked about earlier, some of those softer sides, that creativity, that interest, that, diversity or cross-functional, team, that's the power combo, right there, when you can be creative and adaptive, and you can also be analytical, structured, and apply some good, problem-solving, critical thinking techniques.
Yeah, so let me tie these two things together. So you earlier said it was really good to have data, bring data. And I remember a byline out of Google, it's a decade ago now. I'm sure it's probably still there. But, it's one thing to have an opinion and a good story, but it was really important to have data. And data in this context doesn't mean any old data, and it for sure doesn't mean fabricated data. It means confidently measured facts about what it is you're trying to understand. And I do think getting comfortable with data and knowing that the data is true, and I don't mean true or false, I really mean that you understand where it came from and how it was measured. And if it has weaknesses, a lot of measurement does have weaknesses. Well, that's okay. You can still use it. Just don't overstate its value, right? Well, that's where critical thinking comes in, right? Is to know that, wow, that's interesting data, but you know what? It doesn't match physics and reality. So there must be something wrong. Go back and check your measurement technique. Maybe something's wrong there. Or your data source, you never know. In today's world, I find it interesting. We're off doing data pattern matching everywhere. And sometimes you wonder, somebody should just ask, well, what was the source? How did we measure that in the first place? We're down in this minute detail, and you might not even have the defense that the data can support that kind of detailed decision, right? Because it just wasn't that.
Yeah. So that's why there will be a future job, which is to check on the robots,
Well, yeah, that's a good way to say it. You just went into several different ditches there. But robots themselves, this is one of the things they don't do, is they don't have critical thinking. They don't have the ability to make the choices that humans do it innately. That's just how we evolve.
Well, we can certainly advance some of that and make it better, but again, there's lots of things there that we'll want to look at. And again, this is important both for the workforce, it's areas of opportunity if people have certain interests in artificial intelligence, machine learning, other more advanced, areas of computing. And so, just understanding that we can build bias either of certain, decisions or certain different criteria that we feel is important. We often build that in a bit too naturally without making sure that was a conscious benefit for whatever that artificial intelligence task is going to be. So
and maybe we should just remember that the A is artificial. But
there you go.
It helps, but it isn't complete, right? So, well, it's been a joy chatting with you, and we're about out of our time. So, Thom, I'll hand it back to you.
Sure, absolutely. Lory, before I let you go, and one of the things I like to do is when we get somebody really smart, which is every single episode that Craig and I interview, I always like to take this back to sort of the listener. And you touched on something I thought was really interesting and kind of aligns with what I teach and what I'm involved with. And that is, you were talking about the importance of connecting with people. You said it in a couple of different ways, but really inside the company or outside the company, having a network and having mentors and really having the ability to have that human engagement sometimes gets forgotten for people in technical careers. And yet, I know it's super important. So before we go, can we talk a little bit about that importance?
Absolutely, would love to. So I think that, again, taking it back to critical kind of soft skills, set the technology over here is, again, that idea to value diversity in what people think. And also to know that a lot of the problems we're all solving for, I don't care if you're designing a better, pen or better coffee out of my machine in the morning or my more autonomous driving car. There are so many new areas of science and work and consumer understanding and all of that, that I think, again, it's pretty foolish not to be very open in the design process. So one of the things I also, want to make a big plug for that I think would be interesting to people and, of all ages is really to really think through that maybe a big part of their role, no matter what job they have, is they're a designer. They're a designer of problem solving or problem solutions. And so they're going to be a better designer if they can knock ideas around and brainstorm and, really make that a bit of a community, process. That's not the same as saying every design project can be this massive democratic open process, because that might take a little too long, but it certainly does inspire us to not do it alone.
Well, and there's an old famous statement by a professional speaker who's long dead, but a guy named Charlie Tremendous Jones, and he always said that the only thing that really changes you are the books you read and the people you meet. And that part about the people that you can bounce ideas around with, that's one of the biggest things that can actually have an impact on what changes you for the better. And I think that's what you're saying. Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's the connection to what other people know, what they experience, and valuing it and respecting it. I think that's the big advice I would also give to a lot of young people who are starting out and maybe aren't quite sure, which is to, if nothing else, and it costs nothing, and you don't have to go to school for it, is just to be a bit more, holistic in what you kind of look at and think and the factors you kind of take into account, and be fair-minded. And you will both learn a lot and I think solve a lot better problems.
There you go. It's that stay curious. It keeps coming back. I think we just need to stay curious.
That should be maybe that should be the subtitle of our show. It should be the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, Stay Curious, because it does come up in almost every episode.
Great.
So thank you, Lory.
Yeah, Lory,
thank you so much.
Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for everybody who tuned in and listened. Join us every single week, because Craig and I try very hard to bring you more thoughts, ideas, and information in and around product lifecycle management. And for those of you who have careers in that area, we just want to help make you better. So remember, the Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.